So this video apparently is of Metatron celebrating the new DNA of the people in the Middle East. Now, of course, people like me, I'm going to accept this DNA, but I don't think he realizes that some of the people that he's celebrating against won't accept it. So in the beginning, he discusses that he's celebrating. If he knew, that's what he says. But I can't play it because there's some suspect music that's probably going to be copyrightable. Anyway, let's start the video.
Dear noble ones, today's the day. Today is the day of vindication. It is the day of vengeance. Today's the day, my friends. So on Nature here, but I've got a few open, ready here in the tabs. We read, first human genome from ancient Egypt sequence from 4,800 years old teeth. 40 years after the first effort to extract mummy DNA, researchers have finally generated a full genome sequence from an ancient Egyptians. Big deal!
So I'm just going to start by saying, I don't know, but I hope he would celebrate like this if it was the other way around as well. Because, I don't want it to be something that could be interpreted the wrong way. Now, I will perfectly assess and show why this is not as big a deal as he thinks it is. But let's keep going. So let's start with why I'm doing this video. Of course, it's because I put up a poll and most people decided that, yes, I should react to some of his videos that has to deal with quote unquote Afrocentrists, which, to be fair, on some degree, he's dealing with some people who would call themselves Afrocentrists, which I don't recommend because it's not necessarily a name that is a compliment, as many Black people have played on this show and in real life, really, people have told me, can tell you that Afrocentric is not a compliment. A lot of people, they see it the same as they see the word hoteps, as they see any of these words. Now, as most people know on this channel, I'm more of a middle ground type of person. I don't obsess over the idea that, all DNA in Egypt has to be 100% African or the world will crumble. And in fact, most people I know who are considered Afrocentrists will say the exact same things. In fact, I know someone who is very popular in the Afrocentrist circle, and they believe that Moors are mainly Middle Eastern people. But we'll get back to this. I just want to state, by the way, that obviously I have different opinion than a lot of people, but the reason why I'm putting this out there is because I think there's some people who are obsessing over this idea of a uniform group that has the exact same beliefs. And the Afrocentric community, quote unquote, especially when it's not done through academia, is definitely not the same through and through. Enough bootloading. Let's carry on.
And you know why this is a big deal, noble ones? This is a big deal because of the date. You see, this is not genome from an ancient Egyptians from the New Kingdom. This is not a genome of, but it's Ptolemaic Egypt. No, sir. This is from the very beginning of Egyptian history. We've got a full genome. So, if we consider some of the debates that I've had online over the years, this guy should be from what? Sudan?
So let's start with a couple things. So this is probably around 2700 BC, which is a pretty long time, but it's not necessarily the very beginnings of Egypt. Narmer, for example, who represents the unification of the two Egypts, is from 3100 BC, and this would be about 400 years later. Maybe that doesn't matter to anybody, but it sort of matters to me.
Am I right? Because if he's not, then we're going to have a problem.
So it may seem like we're going to have a problem, but maybe we are, maybe we're not. So let's take a couple things into consideration. But first, let's let him discuss what was discovered.
Because this is the very beginning of ancient Egypt. And I'll tell you all the details on who this person was, but let me just say that if anyone is going to try and say, oh, probably a tourist, this guy was pretty high, elite, pottery worker. So, no, this was an ancient Egyptian, all right?
So this video is going to be a little longer than I thought it was going to be because of some of these claims that I have to just debunk real quick. The idea that if you're working in Egypt, you can't be a foreigner makes no sense. Just like Egyptians were foreigners in some Arabian countries and they were working there. It's not the only way that you can be in a country is to be a tourist. You can also work there as a foreign person or even live there or move there or marry a local or any of the things like that that can happen. And we can talk about that later because I made a whole video about how Asiatics and Arabs and Africans and Nubians have been moving with one another the whole time. And of course, I remember saying in my original video that I'm perfectly okay with the idea of Middle Eastern people moving into Africa. I just want to know why people deny that Africans moved out of Africa. Let's carry on. So obviously, you see here Tushaka speak. Bardakama says Tukasha shekels have silver. An Egyptian woodworker, chief of 100. So he's a chief of 100, and he's a woodworker, but he's an Egyptian, and he's in the Persian areas, as you can see there at Parsa, and for whom Vahauku is responsible. So, in other words, we have a person here who is a foreigner working in another country. That's not odd, especially not for the ancient world. But maybe this one DNA proves that every single Egyptian was a Middle Eastern person, except for like 10% of the black people who lived in the South. Maybe that's what's really going on.
Oldest and most complete ancient Egyptian human genome ever sequenced reveals ties to... I'm sorry, I need to do that.
Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia.
So this might be shocking information that is useful for a lot of people, but I will show why this is not necessarily shocking information, especially if we take the best arguments of the quote unquote Afrocentrists. But first, I want to see where he goes with this information. Ties to Mesopotamia can mean many things.
But this is not, you've seen nothing. You've seen nothing. Now here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. Ancient Egyptian genome reveals 4,500-year-old genetic ties to Mesopotamia. This is a big deal. So this study is a study that is very recent, very recent. Finally, we see an ancient Egyptian genetic connections.
So, of course, you would expect that this would be finally, but in actual fact, they've been releasing a lot of DNA. And as I said, they had a few that had Black African DNA. Now, I will admit that these were from later periods, but this proves that the people were right, that even in the lower parts of Egypt, whatever you want to call them, upper parts, lower parts, don't care, those places had Black people in the ancient times. But let's first carry on and see exactly the claims that are being made about the people. Now, obviously, one of the claims that he said is that the people should be directly from Sudan, which again is like a very small claim in Afrocentrists. A lot of people claim that the ancient Egyptians were too light to be Sudanese people. And of course, it would make sense because you've got other options like Cushites who live as the Beja in Egypt, by Egypt, and in Egypt.
And it's Levantine. Man, I've been saying this. Anyways, this is the actual...
So it's time I show this video. Of course, a lot of people have already seen this video, and you guys will already understand that it's not a shock that one person in ancient Egypt would have this DNA. And I remember in the last video that I reacted to Metatron on Egypt, I mentioned that the debate is not about whether there is or isn't Middle Eastern people in Africa. The question is, what are the percentages between black and white?
Start with Khufu. Look at Khufu. The features on his face are pretty clear there. You see a flat nose. That's not an aquiline nose. It's flat and broad. And the lips, full. But not as full as others, yes. But they're still full. Now, in Khufu's family, some mixing occurred. His father may have taken a foreign consort, but Khufu's mother seems to have been a Kemite lady, yeah, but the other must have been a foreign lady. You will see very soon why I'm saying this. And yes, polygamy was a thing among Kemite pharaohs. Why am I saying that Khufu's father must have taken a foreign consort? Because of Khufu's brother, Rahotep. Look at Khufu's brother Rahotep. Some mixing occurred here clearly, because his mother is unknown, and his mother must have been Eurasian, a Eurasian consort to his father. So Rahotep is Khufu's half-brother in today's conception of things, because again, polygamy was a thing in Kemet. And Khufu himself may have also taken a Caucasian consort. Look at one of Khufu's daughters. Her skin is really pale. She looks quite mixed. So some mixing definitely occurred in Khufu's reign during the beginning of the 4th dynasty. And look at Rahotep's wife as well. These are the images they love to show everyone. Oh, look at the ancient Egyptians. I remember in Metatron's video, these are the images he kept showing. I was like, oh, but dude, there are many more couples that don't look like these two. But okay. Anyway, look at Rahotep's wife, clearly a Eurasian lady. Her skin is so pale. This is how they represented the Eurasians. If you look at this other picture of the pharaoh Seti I conquering Eurasians, look at their skin, very pale too. But yes.
So if you look at the date of Khufu, so take the date of that study that he's got 4,800 years ago. If you do the maths on that, that's about 2,700 BC. This is 2,600 BC, basically. And already we're throwing Asiatics in there. Not only are we throwing them in because of this, but we have writing that goes all the way back that mentions Asiatics this far back. Now, of course, the ties to Mesopotamia there is a very interesting choice of words.
Study. This is the full study. I've already read the entire thing, which took a while. I'll be honest with you. And when it comes to the genomic stuff and all the detailed explanation, I think I might need help from a professional. But regardless of that, my friends, and for this one, I'm opening chat because I need to see what everyone and share the truth once and for all.
So again, I don't know what truth is being shared here because, as I mentioned, most people already knew that there were Asiatic people in Egypt. The DNA thing that would surprise us, in fact, the DNA that would really surprise us was if Egypt did a DNA study and they mentioned a black person, forget 2000 BC. If they mentioned a black person somewhere in around the age of 1500 BC and that person was 100% black, that would shock us. This does not shock us. In fact, what shocks us about this DNA is that they put it to Mesopotamia and they don't put it to like England.
I need to open this to everyone. Now, it's not, I'll be honest, okay, because you know me, I'm always intellectually honest, regardless of what people say. Of course, this is one person. So it's not that now I'm going to say every single ancient Egyptians had ties to the Levant.
So I don't even think that's intellectually honest. I think that's just normal honesty. Because I think most people would say that, like I mentioned, Quelamika, most of the people that he would deem Afrocentrists would say that there is an Asiatic bend to it. And as I've mentioned, I've watched far-right people who believe that the ancient Egyptians are mainly Asian say that they must have had some level of black people since they live so close to the black areas. So again, none of this is shocking. This is still part of the debate. It would be over if, it's not over till it's over, if you know what I mean. But again, who's doing let me not even get into the conspiracy theory parts. Let me not say who's doing the DNA testing and are they being selective.
Or that every single one had that. But because I'm not the one who says they were all black, but I'm the one who said they were mixed, it seems like a certain expansion and population relocation already was a thing at the very beginning of ancient Egypt.
So again, let's carry on with the video that talks about this word. Now, maybe it's just a language problem, but the word multi-ethnic means that the people don't belong to the same ethnicity. which again, you can be of two completely different races and belong to the same ethnic group, like Hispanics. You get Hispanics, which are considered black and some are considered white. Some are considered more like Native Americans when they go to another country, but they're basically all belong to the same ethnic group. And I think that's why he got confused about this. No one has ever said that the ancient Egyptians could never be multiracial. Now, is the majority multiracial? I personally don't think so. And if we take this person specifically, who shows no sign of sub Saharan African DNA, either way you look at it, if you go from this would say on the other side that they're not multi ethnic or multiracial. But let's play another video of someone else who was saying this. And I said this before when I said these two people, they're not as far apart in opinion as they think.
As we always said. And now we have proof. So how about we have a look? Let's read a little bit from here, read a bit from there, and then we see. So, teeth from an elderly man who lived around the time that the earliest pyramids were built have yielded the first full human genome sequence from ancient Egypt. And I'm all for it. The remains are 4,800 to 4,500 year old, overlapping with a period in Egyptian history known as the Old Kingdom of the Age of the Pyramid. They harbor signs of ancestry similar to that of other ancient North Africans as well as people from the Middle East, researchers report today in Nature.
So, of course, I'm going to push back on that because North African DNA, which they claim is real DNA, that comes from around 10,000 BC, does have some Middle Eastern, but a lot of that Middle Eastern is long dead. And so there's another group that comes in. So I don't know where they're getting the idea that this DNA matches other ancient North Africans. But the second part is black DNA has already been sequenced in other North African places. Look at Morocco. If you want to go look at the Moroccan studies where they find Ibero-Mauritian DNA and stuff like that. Black DNA is found within the people, which is sort of what you would expect in Egypt as well, because of its proximity to the Eastern African lands. That's not the only evidence. Obviously, we can go by the statues, which we can see a lot of them are inspired by black people, not to mention the wearing of the Nubian wig since the early days, which tells us that they have been in contact with Nubians since the very beginning. And then, of course, the whole other evidence that's there. Now, you could say, okay, but is this DNA not enough? Is it not enough where you can go, okay, but the wind is blowing in a specific direction? And the answer is yes, if you believe that all the DNA, yes, if you believe that all the DNA is going to be the same as this one. And if you take the 2017 study, that DNA is not similar to this one. That DNA had black DNA in it, as I mentioned before. The one with the pharaohs, that one was incomplete. The one with Tutankhamun and all these other people, and Tutankhamun and all those people had a touch of Mitanni. So we'll get back to that as well.
This is huge. And I'll show you, because what we are reading today, if you do this, okay, it shouldn't be that surprising. Because you see, when people claim that the ancient Egyptians' origin is down here, they're out of their mind.
So again, I don't know why we have to stretch things that far. I do agree, anyone who claims that the ancient Egyptians come from South Africa is out of their mind. Now, name me one person who claims that the ancient Egyptians come from South Africa. Anybody. Even the people who think that they're Nilotic, the word is there, Nilotic, meaning that they believe they come from the Nile. The other people who claim they come from parts of Western Africa, like Chad and places like that, they only say that because that's very close to Egypt. And obviously you have the Kushites. We have actual people who are actually black, who have a tradition that continues with Egypt inside of Egypt. And this goes back thousands of years. So why would they not assume that? This is to try and make it seem like the other side is ridiculous. And I don't know why. I mean, the study seems to be more on his side. There's no need to over exaggerate anything.
When they say it's from here, I'm like, okay, fine, I can see some people moving, great. If they say from Sudan, I'm like, well, that's relatively close. And one thing that I do agree with a lot of people that are usually my intellectual opponents, but I still will say it if I agree, is that if we consider the African humid period, then yeah, the Sahara wasn't a barrier if we go really, really back in time.
Okay, so I'm going to have to discuss this part because it's very important. There is no time period in which we have writing. None, not a one time period which we have writing. Not one piece. All the other evidence of the Sahara being a barrier, even when it is a desert, all that evidence comes from speculation. I'm telling you, I've read all of them. I've tried to read all of them to you, from the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the Arabs, the who are the people who are there, the Coptics, the Jews. Everybody says that the people who live in the Sahara have trade with the people who live in the northern parts of the Sahara. So the people of the Fezzan population, the people of the Mali civilization, wasn't called that at the time, the people of Sudan, all of those people have had direct contact with the northern parts for a very, very long time. And of course, 10,000 BC, we have DNA of the mixing, and we know that people in North Africa have been mixing for a long time with Black Africans, no matter what they look like personally, mixing with West Africans, no matter what they look like personally. This barrier theory, in my opinion, is one of those things where I look at it and I go, they're still going with that to this day. Now, obviously, I understand it's going to be harder to cross a desert than it is to cross like an open field or, a road. That's going to be way harder, but that doesn't make it impossible. It definitely doesn't make it, insurmountable, because we've seen them surmounted. And again, I'll say it again, since the beginning of any writing that you can find, let's talk about the ancient Egyptians. Do the ancient Egyptians not claim that they can travel south, southwest, southeast, south, whatever you want, any direction? They have writings about them traveling to the south.
Like I'm talking 14,000 years ago, all the way up to 5,000 years ago, this was green and all that, so it wasn't a complete blockage. Problem is that what they fail to admit is that there is no barrier here either. And what people often...
So again, this is making the argument for a lot of the people that he would consider Afrocentrists. Afrocentrists don't say there's a barrier to Egypt. They definitely don't say there's a barrier to Egypt. They say, actually, it should be easy to travel to the other side because, first of all, the Middle East has always been connected to Ethiopia. Now, that little sliver that he put there, that's a way smaller route, than traveling north from Sudan. That road is very tiny. Now, do I believe that it's highly likely that some people crossed it? Obviously. But also people went from Ethiopia to the Middle East. There was the circle trade over there that has already been proven. They've proven that the obsidian trade came from Ethiopia. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's been proven. Oh yeah, by the way, monkey DNA has already proven that the land of Punt was somewhere in Eritrea or Ethiopia, mainly Ethiopia, because of the monkeys that are found there.
Don't realize, I suppose, is that the African continent is literally connected by land to Asia and the Near East, which means you can walk it.
Yeah, which is why there are some people who I personally wouldn't call Afrocentrists, because a lot of them don't like Black people, who claim that Jews, early Jews, would have been Black because they would have just walked out of Africa. Nobody's claiming that you can't walk into Africa from Asia, and you can't walk into from the people who are claiming. There are people claiming that there's no proof whatsoever that Africans made their way north into those regions, even though they did it multiple times prior to the dates of ancient Egypt. And then, of course, we have like written records of like Nubians literally going to Asia.
So how are people okay with thinking that the ancient Egyptians, they were all from this area, they're okay with them going through this, but when you say, but what about population movement like this, not to mention that you can move by sea, and we know for a fact that all of these populations, see the Phoenicians for example, did move by sea.
So my understanding, if I have to just do the Asiatic one, my understanding of the Asiatic theory, that the Asians who poured into Africa around, I mean, I hate to say the date as well because it sounds crazy, around 10,000 BC, my understanding is that they did not have boats, at least not large boats, and they did not go by sea. They just went through that little sliver. Now, of course, what this Asiatic theory says, is there actually were people in Africa at this time. They just were outcompeted by the Asiatics. This is the theory that they throw out there. And then they say they traveled even further south and stopped by the border of Sudan, where the populations weren't necessarily always consistent. The Nilotics constantly changed hands in terms of power. Again, this is the Asiatic theory. No one's denying that Phoenicians would have made their way, because first of all, Phoenicians are late to the game. No one's denying that Hyksos would have made it in late to the game. And also, I've talked about how some of the people who we call Hyksos would have been Indo-Europeans, therefore having some what we call white people DNA and stuff like that.
So you can do this by sea, and you can do this by land, and yet they act as if there is a massive barrier here, which makes absolutely no sense. And now, not only we had clear indication of cultural continuity and connections between people from the Levant and ancient Egypt, because if ancient Egypt had zero connection to this section of the world and the Eastern Mediterranean, it would literally be the only North African area in the sea that would have zero connection, since Libya has those connections too.
Well, again, he's using speculation logic. Even if there are Asiatics in Egypt, it's not a good argument to say the whole of North Africa has Asiatics, therefore Egypt should have Asiatics too. It would make complete sense. I mean, we know Libya has had black people there for a very long time, and they're like literally the neighbors of the ancient Egyptians. And these type of Libyans are different than those of the Nilo-Sahara. But again, we'll get back to that. It would be perfectly reasonable to say that they took that route, traveled down, and then another migration happened by Africans that locked them into that North African area. As we know, the Egyptians became a very one type of people. In other words, the Egyptians became the Egyptians. And we don't see writing in Libya. We don't see writing in Tunisia. We don't see writing until way later. So there's something going on in Egypt that is completely unique to what's going on in the rest of North Africa, which is one of the arguments of this, oh, they brought sophistication to Africa, which is like, okay, so why didn't that sophistication make its way to Tunisia?
Tunisia and Carthage, we just demonstrated that it's connected to the entirety of the Aegean, in fact. And
again, Carthage is late to the game. We're talking about a very much later period.
To Europe up to a certain extent, and I know they're going to hate me for saying that, but I'm not saying it. DNA analysis is, and that's the same.
Well, again, this part is a huge debate because, of course, the people who are in the Middle East would later make their way to Europe. And so it's not known whether they carry European DNA because they came back from Europe, or it was because this was already inside of them and then it made its way to Europe. And so you can see similarities between these two people. Now we know for a fact that Middle Eastern people made their way to Europe. It's an open it again, I'll say it again. If that small area is a crossroads, that small area is a crossroads to North Africa, then Europe, the gate of Europe from the Middle East, is literally it's like a planet compared to that tiny little piece. Yet the people who live on the borders, even though they look exactly like Middle Eastern people, they're not considered Middle Eastern people. They're considered Europeans like every other person. And I discussed this, of course, early on when Metatron wrote to me that, even Metatron on site has the appearance of a Middle Eastern person. Dark black hair, his face and everything. I mean, I know some people think Middle Eastern people are all jet black, but look up Syrians.
Came all the way here. All of this coastline, including my beautiful island of Sicily, is being continuously moved, showed population clusters from this area to go, but for some reasons they didn't go to Egypt. It is obvious that this is a conduit of multi-ethnicity.
So again, it's a conduit for multi-ethnicity, except black people. That's what the theory says. That's what that's what this DNA is saying. That's what a lot of the DNA is saying. That apparently the multi-ethnicity does not include black people. And I know Metatron's not going to find that part suspicious, but we do, because again, we hear this multi-ethnic stuff. We hear all of this. What's multi-ethnic about being 100% Middle Eastern?
It is multi-ethnic like the rest of it, of this area here. But yet they act like this is a barrier. Well, it's not. And now we have proof, because the one single complete genome that we have from this period genetically connected to this area of the... What you gonna say now? Are you gonna admit, oh wow, this goes away? Of course not. They're gonna say it's a lie. But who cares?
So I'm definitely not saying it's a lie. And I've shown you some people who already accept that as early as 2600 BC, Eurasians would have made their way into Africa. It's not like it's something that is like controversial in the Afrocentric circles, unless you take the people who say, everybody was black until the 1700s. Those people are ridiculous, and who wants to talk about that?
I'm making this video for you, not for them. Abstract. Ancient Egyptian society flourished for millennia, reaching its peak during the dynastic period, approximately 3150 to 30 BC. However, owing to poor DNA preservation, questions about regional interconnectivity over time have not been addressed because whole genome sequencing has not yet been possible. Here we sequenced a 2 times coverage whole genome from an adult male Egyptian excavated at Nuwariat. Sorry if I mispronounced it.
The way this is written is very interesting, because we were told to give up on the black Egyptians prior to this, like that, oh yeah, a study was done in 2017 that completely knocks you off, and it's been done through thousands of years and blah 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 blah. But suddenly, all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, this is the DNA that's going to shatter it forever. And this time it's no longer 3 like last time, it's 1.
This is south of Cairo, not too far from Memphis, in fact. Radiocarbon dated 2800 to 2800 BC, okay? He lived a few centuries after the Egyptian unifications, bridging the early dynastic and old kingdom periods. The body was interred in a ceramic pot within a rock-cut tomb. And by the way, it's because he was a potter, among other things. Potentially contributing to the DNA preservation. Most of his genome is best represented by North African Neolithic ancestry among available sources at present. Yes, approximately 20% of his genetic ancestry can be traced to genomes representing the Eastern Fertile Crescent.
So again, everybody knows that the Fertile Crescent is like the worst enemy of several types of people, except people who are somewhat reasonable. We know that obviously Mesopotamia had civilization pretty early, and they had contact with places as far as India and places as near as Africa. And this is why, again, it's not a surprise. Turkey is another place which they had direct contact with. And this is why it's not this giant surprise. In fact, it's one of the giant speculations that were made by people who study Africa, that we should find a Nubian or an Egyptian or an Ethiopian somewhere in Mesopotamia, even if it's just one person, because it feels impossible that they did not trade with these people at all.
including Mesopotamia and surrounding regions. So, this ancient Egyptian, we don't know how typical it was, but this ancient Egyptian has ties to local populations in North Africa and the Levant. Nothing further down. This genetic affinity is similar to.
So if I were to hypothesize, I would say he's Thai. I mean, they're pretty much making it there, but he's Thai to the Levant and he's tied to Mesopotamia and stuff like that. Does suggest some level of foreignness. Maybe one generation, two generation, who knows? But it does suggest it. Otherwise, they'd just be like, no, it's just got ties to like North Africa. The DNA is very consistent with North Africa, and that's it.
The ancestry appearing in Anatolia and the Levant during the Neolithic and Bronze Age. But we did see that already the Carthaginians had Anatolian ancestry and Aegean ancestry. DNA.
Time-wise, Carthage is not comparable to this DNA. So I don't know why they're making that comparison. Carthage is from a completely different time. And I mean a completely different. If you think about the difference, so much can change in that space, especially since, again, if we accept the Asiatic theory that there was more Asians pouring into Africa. It's not like they came there like 2,000 years ago and then they stopped moving. The argument is that they just kept pouring in.
And makeup. And once again, we see the same in Egypt, and it shouldn't surprise us because, again, North Africa is in the Mediterranean. This is what these people did. Whether you like it or not, these were seafarers. And
so I don't actually like that whole like, oh yeah, it's in the Mediterranean. Sure, the Mediterranean Ocean or sea is right there, right? But that doesn't mean they're Mediterranean. I don't even like that whole Mediterranean thing because, again, if we look at the Red Sea, we can see that the people of Sudan border the Red Sea and the people of Saudi Arabia border the Red Sea, but that doesn't mean anything. Like saying that people border the seas means nothing. We know the Sudanese people had boats. We know the Ethiopians had boats. We know the Eritreans had boats. We know the Yemenites had boats. We knew the Saudi Arabians had boats. We know all these people had boats, but you don't just instantly assume, okay, they had boats, they share a sea, they're close to each other, therefore all these people are Red Seaans. Just like you would say those people are Mediterranean.
they were settlers, they were colonizers, and they were spreading for economic reasons. Sometimes it's more a trade network. Although more genomes are needed to fully understand the genomic diversity of early Egyptians, as I was saying, of course, I'm not going to say one is enough, but according to certain people, this should have been a guy from Sudan. Our results in.
So let's address this part where he says, according to certain people. I want to ask this question very sincerely. Do you believe that those people who believe that every single person in Egypt must be a Sudanese person, do you believe that this DNA is going to convince them?
Indicate the contacts between Egypt and the Eastern Fertile Crescent were not limited to objects and imagery, such as domesticated animals and plants, as well as writing systems, but also encompassed human migration. And human migration means intermixing.
So again, the type of statues that, and this is the interesting part that they mention this, the type of statues that you see from Mesopotamia that look something like this that you can find in Egypt in the early times, again, make a suggestion that people as late as those years, 2700 BC, were flooding in from certain places, right? Coming in from Mesopotamia, whatever. This would not be the same as natives at all. I think I used the word flooding. Well, let's say not flooding, bringing things. And of course, for the most part, my argument would be it's way easier to bring objects than it is to bring people. It's way easier to trade objects than it is to trade people. which is why most people said, you're probably going to find way more objects than you're going to find people. And again, we found one person and a whole bunch of objects.
And intermixing is exactly what we are finding here, since 20% is from the 11. This is phenomenal, guys. This is like, it's exactly what I've been expecting. Like all the years where we were looking at the pictorial evidence, we were looking at the debating all the ways of, but it depends because the colors and the pigments. And then, but what about these vases? Because these vases are used as well. The same techniques are used in Mesopotamia. And they were like, no, because not from this place. We fought over this for years.
So we did fight over it for years, and a lot of people still haven't explained why the black topped pottery, which is hardly done, well, never done in the Middle East, and hardly done in other parts of North Africa. So, in other words, Egypt does it, but the rest of North Africa doesn't do it at all. Black topped pottery, which is not even done by other parts of West Africa and stuff. They do a similar type of pottery, but not black topped pottery, which is handmade, which is very typical of the, let's call it the Sudanic regions. This is a pre-dynastic version of that pottery. So again, either we just then conclude that with this pottery, that means that the people in pre-dynastic Egypt were Sudanese, or we say, let's wait for DNA. By the way, you can see this pottery clearly inside of the tombs of pre-dynastic mummies, which makes you think, did they just trade with the Nubians, or were they part of the Nubians? By the way, I'm saying Nubians, Sudanese.
Kept telling me I was lying. And now genomic, they do one, and it points to the Fertile Crescent. 0 DNA from Sudan.
So firstly, I can point you to like 4 other genetic studies that have been done on the ancient Egyptians, and you'll be shocked, but all of them point to Eurasia.
Or Horn of Africa and whatnot. It is notable that both our QPADM modeling and admixture clustering excluded any substantial ancestry in the Nuwariat genome related to the 4,500-year-old genome from Mota, Ethiopia, or other Central, Eastern, or Southern Africa. Southern Africa. I'm sorry.
I don't know what the South Africa thing is, because we know that South Africa, for the most part, starting from Congo down, was mainly pygmies of various kinds. So Khoisan people and the other pygmy tribes, the Batwa, whatever you want to call them. So I don't know where that argument comes from. I know people who say the Egyptians left Egypt and ended up in those regions. I don't know anyone who says they came from Egypt. Now, Mota is a very interesting one, because Mota represents one of the earliest groups in East Africa, and it showed that, you know, East Africans didn't just get dominated by Asians as soon as possible. In fact, there's no evidence of Asiatics during the time of the land of Punt, which a lot of people said the land of Punt was probably just another Asiatic time in East Africa. Which, of course, the argument is always all African kingdoms are just Asiatic tribes.
You are being excessively pedantic. I know. Does this mean that this man is white? No, but I never said that the ancient Egyptians of the freaking old kingdom, I'm gonna say this in full camera, because that's the thing, it's not like they still man my argument, no, they straw man it. Did I ever say that the ancient Egyptians of the old kingdom were white? No.
So I've said this again, by saying the statement, and even the one he said before, Afrocentric is a title. If Metatron was black, they would throw that title on him for what he's saying right now, for being, I guess the word is lenient on the idea that the ancient Egyptians could be black. Even if they're Asiatic, they could be black people, which is something that is accepted by black people, that Asiatics can be black as well. But let's not get too deep in this one because this is outside the realm of mainstream stuff. And I don't want to attack ideas that are too far out. If you know about the people that we've debated, as according to them, this is a blonde man found in pre-dynastic Egypt, and his limbs represent that of Middle Eastern to Caucasian European people, and there's nothing, let's use the word, negroids can do about it. Again, do you like that's why they're coming at you with that, because they're stereotyping in the same way that people stereotype the word Afrocentric, and they pretend like they're using it in like a lecture way, but in real life they're using it as an insult. And I'll say it again, and I can play that woman if you want. The word Afrocentric is not a compliment.
Would be stupid. I never said it. Were there white Egyptians? Yes. Now given, make period. Because they relocated people from Greece, all that area. And then, of course, are the Romans.
From the context of what we're saying, we have to be very specific. He's saying that white people, when he's using white people now, he's saying like European white people.
Invade, then a higher percentage, they also create some settlements apart from the ruling elite, but they recreated some settlements with Greeks relocated, and then the Romans relocate there. So yes, there is a certain amount of Egyptians, the people that could have been born in Egypt, but they were originally from, I don't know, Italia. We do,
which Metatron would know by this date that no Afrocentric goes against that. Afrocentrics are the first people to use Herodotus, who they know is a white man from Europe, and they use him as evidence for ancient Egyptians being black because he describes them as black people, and many other Arabs do too, saying that their skin color changed because of a certain thing, but we don't need to get deep into that. But he knows that obviously no one is saying that the ancient Egyptians would not have been a certain scale. We know all this. But those Italians being there in ancient Egypt, no, I don't think so. By the way, the Italians wouldn't have even looked anything like the ones they look like now, because there was an increase of Indo-Europeans, Middle Easterners, and certain types of people. The Italians and all these other people, they also are a mixture of people. That's why they look the way they do, especially a mixture of people from the Middle East. These are people from Turkey, and I want you to notice what they sort of look like. And these are people of Greece. And again, more consistent, in my opinion, with Middle Easterners.
have some surnames in Northern Africa that are Celtic in origin. So yes, some Egyptians could have been white at that time, but that would have been a minority in the population.
Yeah, but by that time, there's writings of black people as far as Britain. So, and again, I mean like one or two people. I don't mean like 1,000.
Further back you go, the further likely it is that the population will be white, or European if you don't want to use the word white. Some may have been, because you could.
I would definitely prefer to use the word European rather than white, because there's a lot of white people in the Middle East, and I definitely don't think in this case you're using that word to refer to those people. Now, there's some dark people in the Middle East too, some really dark people, but we'll get back to that.
Have had Carthaginians relocating there, and now we know the Carthaginians are of European origins from a DNA perspective. But when it comes to the bulk of the population, they were brown. And
okay, so I'm going to skip the Carthage thing because I'm going to address that in a different video. And, there will be a difference between original Carthage and Empire Carthage.
then some of them would have been black, and those percentages vary geographically and according to the time. This is what I said. I was right. Every single thing that I said now demonstrated by DNA analysis. And
so this part is definitely not correct. Everything is not confirmed by DNA. They still have not explained why the people in Egypt look nothing, including in the portrayals of foreigners. They still haven't explained why the Egyptians look nothing like the foreign people of Asia. They still haven't explained why they demonstrate black facial features. They still haven't explained why they have thick lips. They still haven't explained why, by the way, these people who have broad noses, thick lips, and I'd say somewhat moderately long faces, in some cases short faces, they still have not demonstrated why this occurs so much in Egypt, which, of course, I want you, anybody, I dare anybody, forget the DNA, because we can use DNA for whatever. I want you to grab these faces and go get Mesopotamian statues, Akkadians, whatever you want, and compare them and go and you try and convince yourself that these are the exact same people. There's a reason why they use the yellowy statues. There's a reason why they use all of that, because it's not representative. If, again, I said it again, if the ancient Egyptians were trying to color themselves yellow and they ended up with red, then they just suck at art.
This is not a little small research. No, no, no. This was praised by professors at Harvard. This is peer-reviewed stuff. And it says every single thing that I've been saying and receiving backlash and hatred for years, all correct. Boom.
So I understand that obviously he probably got hate from a specific group of people, but I think he should answer the moderates questions, because I think that is more productive as a conversation instead of dancing on the heads of leprechauns.
This is what the genome says. Once again, the guy had brown skin. Yes, that doesn't make him an African though, because he's connected to the Levant.
So actually, I want him to read that part about him having brown skin, because again, that's a Eurocentric opinion that if you have brown skin, in fact, dark brown skin, then you are not a black person. That's a Eurocentric thing. We never decided on that. We never said if you have Asiatic DNA. We know people who have Asiatic DNA and we still consider them black people in Africa. So this Eurocentric concept that if you have Asiatic DNA, you're automatically a white person, no matter how dark your skin is, that's their stuff. And you know, I can already show you an inconsistency. Let's try one example and see if I'm wrong about this. So these people here are not African at all. They're Asiatics, closer to Indians and Pacific Islanders and people like that. But I bet you that every other person in the world will still claim that these people are black people. In fact, if these two people went to any Asian family, they would have a way harder time trying to marry into that family than any other group of people. I'm talking about Polynesians, uh, whatever, pick one, Chinese, Indian, pick one, Middle Eastern, Russian. They would have a way harder time than if they had pale skin and didn't look anything like this. And of course, the reason is because they don't, this whole like DNA cuts off and then you're no longer a black person. That's not a real thing. That's something they made up now. People in the 1700s had no idea what DNA was. A black person is a black person. We all know what it is. These two people would be considered black, but they're actually Andamanese, meaning that they're Asian. And again, they've done the DNA test. These people are not black African. They're not recent Africans in the sense like some people used to say they came there like 10,000 years ago. Nope. They're very close to Indians genetically, but because of the way they look, they're considered Negroes.
Unless you think that the Middle Eastern people that are more on the dark olive complexion, unless you think that those are black Africans, then the guy was not from Africa. Well,
that olive thing is so annoying. Like that thing of like, oh yeah, they would have had olive skin. Their natural skin would have been very pale and it would not appear on DNA as dark skin. That's not going to happen. This is what Middle Eastern people generally look like, but because they live in a hot climate, they get that olive skin that you're talking about. This guy from the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Yemen regions, I would consider a black person.
He was, because he was born in Northern Africa. I mean, just the other day, I read someone in the comments that told me, someone was telling me, hey, I'm black, but when I was a child, my teacher, I told her that Egypt is in Africa, and she told me, no, it's in the Middle East. Well, your teacher is an idiot. Egypt is in Africa.
So, of course, the teacher would be idiotic to say that, but Egypt is in the Middle East. The Middle East is a geographic, it's not a geographic region, it's more like a political concept.
Of course, it's in Africa. But, so the guy was African in the sense that he was born in the African continent, but he was not African in the sense that he was a black African. Not this guy. This is not what the DNA says. And so that's a fact now. Like, unless you're telling me that this is some kind of, well, I don't even care what they're going to use to try and justify this. How about we continue reading?
So again, if his skin color is more consistent with this, then this guy would definitely not be considered a white person by anybody. I mean, do you consider this person a white person? I have to know. By the way, this guy's not Indian, which, by the way, Indians are black people, but we don't call them black people because they've marked themselves out of that group, even though other people still consider them black people in treatment.
Having a great time. I don't know about you. But this is great, guys. This is great. Yeah, so we were saying remains age of period. They harbor signs of ancestry similar to that of Northern Africans, as well as people from the Middle East, researchers report today in Nature. We read, it's incredibly exciting and important, says David Reich, a population geneticist at Harvard Medical School in Boston, who was not involved in the study. We, open quotes, we always hoped we would get our first ancient DNA from mummies, close quotes. Numerous.
Okay, so I don't know how much more we need to watch of this because I feel like most of it is just, they're not adding anything new to it.
Labs have tried to extract DNA from ancient Egyptians' remains. In 1985, evolutionary geneticists, can't read that, reported the first ancient DNA sequences from any human, several thousand DNA letters from a 2,400-year-old Egyptian mummy. But this is a lot older, so it's even more significant, because what this tells us is that there were population movement patterns already 5,000 years ago from the Levant, which checks out, absolutely checks.
Yeah, but it is one guy.
Out. Now, does this tell us about the freaking Paleolithic inhabitants of this area? No, it doesn't, but it does tell us about ancient Egypt. And at the end of the day, what population lived in North Africa in, at this point, 50,000 years ago? Doesn't matter when you're talking about ancient Egypt, because there was no pharaonic ancient Egypt 50,000 years ago.
Well, so I would say 50,000 years ago does matter, especially since there's Egyptians that claim that they came to Egypt 50,000 years ago. Some claim they came even earlier than that. But what really matters is when we look at the Egyptians and, when farming started being brought into the area and all this other stuff, at the periods just before that, was Egypt empty? If it wasn't empty, and then suddenly a great group of Asiatics came in, did they get rid of the entire population? Did they outbreed them? Was the population too small? What happened? And if that all did happen, why do the people not have the genetics of some of those people? Why would there be 100% Middle Easterners? Something that we don't find in the early DNA of other parts in North Africa.
So if that's the discussion we are having, then it's different. We can talk about that. But because these people, usually my opponents, talk about ancient Egypt, and this is ancient Egypt. This is the very beginnings, the dawn of ancient Egypt. And will you look at that? What were the chances that the one guy that we managed to do a genomic sequence?
So it is very early in ancient Egypt, but I wouldn't call it the dawn. I mean, maybe it is the dawn, but it's the sun is already in the sky.
Levantine origin. Once again, I'll state it. The guy was not white. As far as I'm concerned, he can have dark brown skin. He can have black skin. It doesn't matter. He's not from Africa originally. He's from the Middle East.
Well, again, that would be a very Afrocentric take. Well, maybe this one would be a more Eurocentric take. The idea that it doesn't matter, even if the guy is a black guy, he's from, the Eurasian part. No, it does matter. That's why we talk about Cheddar Man and we go, look, Cheddar Man's black. And then the Eurocentrists go, yeah, but he's not connected to Africa. No one's saying he's connected to Africa. We're telling you, when people said to us, we're black, they didn't say you're connected to Africa. They said you're black. Us being disconnected to Africa does nothing. Madagascans, some Melanesians, some all of that are not connected at all to Africa, but yet they're still black. And hey, you want more proof of that? Let's try it. Well, North Africans seem to be pale of skin, but they're connected to Africa, yet people don't call them black. By the way, including the black ones. Some of the black ones, they don't call them black until, of course, they run into the white ones who are going to call them black. That's the funny part. It's like, you're not black, but if we see you, you're black. You could be my sister, you could be my brother, but if you're black, you're black.
I mean, there are some Indians that are as dark as some black Africans. This is also to tell you how stupid it is to.
So, of course, this part is just a language game, as I would put it, but it's just a language game because obviously Indian people are black. The reason why they're called Indian, I mean, in their own language, they're called black, especially the South Indians. In their own language, they're called black. But the only reason why you don't call them black is because the word Indian got popular. Just like how Chinese people are white, but people don't call them white. They used to, but they don't call them white anymore because the word Chinese got more popular and Asian got more popular and whatever. And of course, there are very brown Chinese people, but I'm not talking about that. You can go to Japan if you want, pick any other place. And of course, we can pick several places. The Inuit are quite white, but they're not called white people, except of course if you meet, Africans. You come to Africa, we're going to call you a white person. Anybody who's pale of skin, whether it's a Middle Eastern person, a European person, an Asian, you come to Africa, you're mlungu, which means white.
Fixate on the words white and black when we talk about these things. But because they are the ones who fixate over it and weaponize the utilization of terms, they are the ones that say that the word Kemet, or Kumat, as it probably was vocalized, regardless, the word Kemet with the vowel of convention through Coptic, they are the ones that say Kemet means the land of the black, black meaning the people. But that's a modern way of using black that people didn't use back in the day.
So this part, he's acting like it's one simple thing, and I'll bring back this thing where it says, to Shaka speak, Baradakama says Karsha and shekels and half a shekel silver, Harad Kama, his name, an Egyptian woodworker, chief of the 100. There is a reason why the word Kama or Kema or Kemi or Kumat or Kuma is still in dispute to this day. It's not because it's such a simple thing. And in here, the Egyptologists can't even decide if in this place it means the Harad, which means child, and then Kama, meaning either Egypt or black. They can't decide if this means Egypt or black. And this is because of the connection of the words. They're so similar, so close to each other. And again, this is deeper than one thing. The word, whatever you think the ancient Egyptians' DNA was like, it's quite clear that the word black also referred to the way people look like. And this, I hate this idea that people in the past didn't use the word black to refer to dark people. They did. Many different people did. People in India did too. People in all kinds of places used words similar to black to refer to people who had black skin, especially if they had them around all the time.
Even the Romans, it's not like they called black people black, they called them Ethiopians, meaning generally everyone of a phenotypic trait that would probably go from dark brown to jet black.
Okay, so first of all, the word Ethiopian means bird face, which things that are burnt are generally black. So it's the same as calling someone black. It doesn't have to be the exact just one word black. Otherwise, then you're right. Then people didn't use the word black, but they did. They used things that are similar to black.
But the Romans didn't call them black because that's a modern usage. But they do that. It's obviously the black soil opposed to the red soil of the desert. But no, they will say no, it's the land of the blacks.
So again, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can actually be both. Of course, have you heard of the divine herd? Have you heard of the black divine herd? Have you heard about the black ibis? Have you heard about the soil? Have you heard about the hair? There's a bunch of things that they connect to this black color that has to do with anatomy. It, to look at the word and think that it only has one meaning is the modern interpretation. Just like if I said today that guy's white, it does not connect to anything else. That's the modern way of looking at it. Ancient Egyptians connected their words to a whole bunch of things. And so this is why sometimes when you look at hieroglyphics, things aren't going to be written the same way. Today, if we write the word butterfly, there's only one way to write it. But back in the day, they could symbolically write the word butterfly in a way that if you're not an expert, you're not going to be able to read that the word is butterfly. You might read something, let me not even try, but let me just give a fake example. You might be able to read something like one that leaps or something, and then you think, oh, whatever. But in real life, the word is like another way of transcribing the word butterfly.
It's not. It's stupid. You're reading it in a modern sense, and it's linguistic dishonesty. Because then when it's for them, then they'll tell you, well, white doesn't make sense because people didn't use it back then. Then why are you using black in the modern sense then?
So I want to get this out of the way. The word black is not modern. We get this word black for black people from the ancients. The word black is not modern. If we started today and we were going to make up words based on what we know today, there is no way, that we would call all Africans by a similar name, especially if Africans were involved in the naming scheme and stuff like that.
It's always a matter of intellectual dishonesty. But intellectually dishonesty can only take you so far until genetic data is presented and it tells us, Levantine, what you gonna say now? Good. All right, let's have a look at the study proper. I've already read the whole thing, by the way, but I would like to share it with you guys. You know, if you could clone an ancient Egyptian, because here is another thing, chances.
By the way, I hope they never clone an ancient Egyptian. That would be terrifying, especially the fact that he would just be another human being. There's nothing special genetically about Egyptians. They just happen to be in a specific place. Everything that they learn can be learned by anyone in any part of the world. So cloning them does nothing.
You could get a black guy because, as I say, particularly if he's from Upper Egypt, you could get a black person who is Egyptian because originally from Kush, but then they moved in there and then their children were brought up in Egypt, so now they're Egyptians.
But when do you think the Kushites started moving into Egypt? Do you think it was like 700 BC? Do you think it was like 300 BC? Or do you think, as the ancient Egyptians state, that people from the Nubian Kushite type people have been there since the start?
I don't have a problem with that. But if you go statistically, you know what I think? I think that the chances are he will look a lot like a modern Egyptian. And I've heard channels, I don't want to name the channels, but I've heard channels say, oh, when modern Egyptians dress up like ancient Egyptians, they are cosplaying.
Well, they are. And when modern black people dress up like Egyptians, they're cosplaying. You know why? Because that's not their regular dress. They're definitely cosplaying. Now, I don't know what Metatron feels about this, but this is going to be a light bulb moment for a lot of people, especially those on the other side. And they need to. It doesn't matter if the ancient Egyptians were Middle Eastern; they did get replaced by Arabs. The Arabs literally point to the Coptics and go, "There they are. Those are the original Egyptians." They don't say there we are the original Egyptians. They say there they are the original Egyptians. We know that they are not they are cosplaying. They're Arabs. They're Middle Eastern Arabs and people like that. But okay, I guess it was we were going to go with the theory of it. It was 3,000 people that conquered Egypt, and then all of these Middle Easterners that came one after the other during the time of the invasion of Islam that completely changed the genetic makeup of Sudan, completely changed the genetic makeup of Libya, Tunisia, and a lot of Arabia, and even Spain. We're just going to pretend that the gateway, in quotation marks, Egypt, they barely affected.
It's disrespectful, because I do believe there is a certain level of genetic continuity as it's demonstrated here. And so it's
Yeah, but there's a genetic continuity between a lot of Black Americans and like Celtic people. But if they dress up like Celtics, they say that they're cosplaying. I remember there was some Black family from America that went to Ireland or something, or was like claiming the land there or something. And people were like, there's no way your ancestors could come from here. It's like, do you even know American Black people, like especially those who come from slave times? Do you know that they have like continuous DNA with some Europeans, which would mean that that is their ancestral homeland too?
very likely that even though some modern Egyptians might have ties to Arabs, others absolutely.
Oh, only some of them. Only like 12, 13, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 30,000, 40,000. First of all, I'm willing to bet that there was more than 30,000 Greeks in Egypt. And I think their population at one time was like 5 million people in Egypt. And this is 5 million after the Arab invasion. So of what of that population do you think was Arabs? Like 3 million, 1 million? And how long would the polygamist Arabs take to completely dominate genetically?
Particularly through the Coptic element, have ties to ancient Egypt. It's their land. So no, when they dress up as ancient Egyptians, they're dressing up as their ancestors. Once again,
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think it's 100% dress up. If you saw a guy from Italy, right, a guy born and raised in Italy, genetically tied to Italy, and he was dressed like an ancient Roman person, he was just walking around the street, you wouldn't say that guy's cosplaying?
if you're a black African and you too have an ancestor who was black and from Egypt, they did exist, that's fine. It's only when they're like 100% black nation, then you're wrong, and DNA just proved you wrong. Well, that area, again, unless you go into the African humid period, that area is not going to be, because, and that's something that some people that usually argue on my side get wrong, and I do have to say that, is that there was a climate period in Africa. And as I say, it's usually around 14,000 years ago, where the Sahara was green, full of jungles and forests and rivers. Can you imagine that? And the
Which, by the way, doesn't matter that much when it comes to Sudan and Egypt, because Sudan and Egypt were still tied together in the ancient world based on written sources. Maybe those guys were just lying. They just made up. They were like, hey, we're just going to set up fake Egyptian things here so we can pretend that the Egyptians took us over thousands of years ago.
reason is it has to do with the Earth's axial tilt. So it actually has to do, you will have to, maybe I'll have to invite a cosmologist to really look into this, into the details, but generically, it's because something happened with the axis of the Earth.
Well, so it's a little bigger than just a tilt. It's more to do with a wobble. And when the thing wobbles and tilts and it's at an axis and all this other stupid stuff, the Sahara changes and can get dramatically like the desert. And then it can get like, you know, in certain times, rainforests and stuff, which is why we find in Sudan, the parts which are deserty, we still find drawings of giraffes and stuff like that. And in the Middle East, desert parts of the Middle East, we find elephant drawings and stuff, which you're not going to get unless they were there.
Some changes, and these changes completely affected the climate in that area. And if you look at some of the recreations, so how the Sahara region looked in this specific period, it's mind-blowing to imagine that, full of grass and trees and lakes. It would have been incredible. So yeah, when some people say Sahara was a
So if you want to picture that, it's actually not that difficult. Look up videos from the Hunger Belt. The Hunger Belt of the Sahel regions is the parts that start off with trees, forests, water, and stuff like that. And the last 100 years, 10% of the Sahara has, of the Sahel regions have sort of decreased into desertified areas. And so you can see literally the making of it. And of course, the same happened in Sudan, where the people, they tried to hold on to their land, but it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And this is something that's happened in the last few 100 years, 1,000 years. So people think that like it's just this one thing where it's like at one point you have green and then 5000 BC suddenly it turns into brown. No, it's gradual. And that's why so many people actually live in those areas. They lived in isolated pockets. The Nile is an isolated pocket.
barrier, I'm like, yeah, when? You need to ask when, because otherwise you may be creating a straw man that lacks academic validity when you say that. I've seen some 3D recreations, and they look outstanding. And the same thing happened with Carthaginian. If you remember, I made my debunking video of that channel that was talking about Carthage, saying that the original inhabitants came from the Horn of Africa. They do full genomic testing. They are all from the Aegean, Anatolian Peninsula. GG, what can I tell you? Check.
So I recently watched a video with Metatron and Home Team. He's reacting to Home Team history. And at no point does Home Team history claim that Carthage was a black civilization. In fact, Home Team history claims that the Egyptians were probably Middle Eastern. And a lot of people have complained to me like, oh, debunk Home Team history. There's nothing to debunk. He's got a very moderate view about what ancient Egyptians are. And it's very difficult to attack that. Now, maybe Metatron did debunk some other person, but that Home Team history guy was not claiming any of that. He claimed that there would have been a minority of black people.
Mate, the hate I'm gonna get for this, guys, but who cares? I'm here for you, because unfortunately this is an incredible news. Will there be other history channel that are gonna history focused channels that are gonna show this? I don't know.
So I showed this the month it came out, because again, I've said this saying and I'm gonna say it again. The truth, what am I saying? The truth fears no question. The point is not to try and make people seem more supreme than anybody else. Whatever the truth comes out. If we get DNA tests tomorrow and there's like 1,000 of them and they come from wherever, like South Americans do the DNA test, and they found that the ancient Egyptians were actually Chinese people, why would I go that is fake if there's like 1,000 of them? But I will say, you're talking about one person when you talk about there's one person. Imagine if I say, you know what, I'm convinced this one person definitely proves it. And then the next time they find like 5 black guys.
I think they're too afraid to be called racists, but you know me, I'm doing it for you guys. Fertile Crescent, thank you. Cultural exchange continued to develop through the last 4th millennium with the growing Sumerian civilization of Mesopotamia. This period overlaps with the appearance of additional innovations in Egypt, that's something that I've already covered on my videos, by the way, such as the pottery wheel and the earliest evidence of hieroglyphic writing in the form of ivory tags in Tomb UJ at Abydos, which is a big one. Abydos?
Both. It doesn't matter. Yes, it is true that there are innovations that happened in the Middle East that made their way to Africa, but they didn't stop in Egypt. That's the problem. And just because they made their way again to Africa doesn't mean that all of a sudden everyone who has a technology is suddenly a white person. I mean, didn't the wheel make it all the way to like parts of Asia that don't have Middle Eastern people?
I'll go for Abydos. Dated to 3. Yeah, of course, we already talked about this tomb at length. Our knowledge of ancient Egyptians has increased through decades of bioarchaeological analysis, including dental morphological studies of their relatedness to other populations in North Africa and West Asia. This is how it is. In fact, with other teeth, this was already a thing, but now full genomic sequencing? Is it really that strange to think that people in Egypt would be from North Africa and this place, considering how good these guys moved through the sea? I mean, is it really that surprising?
Well, again, he's looking at it in a linear way. It's not surprising that some people who can travel on a boat can get to Egypt. What is surprising is why wouldn't people who border you to the south, so much so that they're literally in your country, why wouldn't those people simply walk north? Like, that's the surprise part. It's like they didn't just walk up to the north and make it very hostile for the people to move into Egypt. Like, what did those people do? Like, why are the people of Sudan, why did they not make it hostile for the Asiatics? By the way, I only use the word hostile because we're talking about a complete removal of people in an area. Now, unless you're saying that the Sudanese people never looked up and went, "Oh yeah, you know that place that like several people who look like us live, where you can just follow the Nile and you'll end up there." Let's not just protect that land or go there.
Or is it obvious? But we needed this, I guess, and it's not going to be enough, but hey, I'll take it. However, the lack of ancient genomes, particularly for the early periods of Egyptian dynastic history, yes, remain a barrier to our understanding of population continuity and gene flow in the region, absolutely. This is why, up to now, this is the first time that I focus on the really early dynastic history. Oftentimes, I talked about late Egypt, I talked about Middle Kingdom, but usually I've always been a little speculative when it comes to the early dynastic period because more difficult. The further back in time you go, the harder it's going to be definitive about things, which is also.
Well, this is true for difficult spots. Some other areas are easier than others. Like, I could have told you that Khoisan people were Khoisan people from 10,000 BC. Yeah, I could tell you that you're going to find Nilotic DNA in Egypt around 10,000 BC too. I can tell you that right now.
Another massive red flag with a certain community because they are definitive about things that happened 5,000 years ago, allegedly.
So I hope the community he's talking about is not Afrocentrists, because I could show you Afrocentrists that are definitely not definitive about ancient Egyptians. I could show you a lot of them. I could show you Afrocentrists that tell you that ancient Egyptians are Middle Easterners. This is why I focus so deeply on saying the time travel thing. Like, if you time travel, if you went back in time, or if we did DNA and it came back that they were all black, would you now call yourself an Afrocentrist because you believe in Egypt being black? Egypt being black has got nothing to do necessarily, at least not fully, with the whole Afrocentric idea altogether. You can believe that the ancient Egyptians were not black and still be into Afrocentrism. You know, some people who don't believe that the ancient Egyptians were black, but they believe the Jews were.
Instead, I'm like, guys, I think geographically, culturally, and looking at pattern trends of this period, it does make sense that Egypt would have been multicultural with intermixture of native North African populations, some black people, since the Sahara was not a barrier, and people from the Near East, ancient Egyptian multi-ethnic beginnings of this civilization, because it's a civilization in this specific area of the Mediterranean basin. It just makes logical sense. I can't prove it because we don't have a full genome, but now we do, and will you look at that? Now I'm going to speak about it, because I speak after I see the evidence. Although individuals from ancient Egypt were subjected to the first effort to isolate ancient DNA, direct genome sequencing has remained elusive.
Okay, so he's repeating himself. I'll react to the last 30 minutes since he makes a completely different point there in a different video. Thank you for watching. Hope you didn't take this to mean that all people in ancient Egypt are Asiatic. I hope you noticed that there's a reason why they linked it to Mesopotamia. Also, they mentioned that the person would have had somewhat darker skin than the modern Egyptians, even though the modern Egyptians themselves had like black DNA, so their skin can vary greatly. But by the way, modern Egyptians, they always brag about we've got more black African DNA today, but somehow they're exactly the same as ancient Egyptians who somehow don't have any. Whatever.